Good morning. We understand there's been some technical difficulties with the audio, so we're going to start over. Just to let you know, my name is Emily Calais-Kozlovish, and I'm sitting here at Court Street in the Office of Educator Effectiveness, and we're happy to be here to share with you an overview of the system today. What we're going to do is talk to you about the context that this evaluation system sits in. We're going to review some of the key changes in the Educator evaluation system from what has previously been in place to today's. We're going to spend some time looking at the rubric and talking about proper uses of the rubric that sits at the foundation of this entire system. And what we'll show you, which is going to be new to many of you who hosted us in your schools over the past year, are some screenshots of the Educator Development and Feedback System, which is the online system that captures the 5-step cycle as the evaluation instrument. At the end, we'll talk about educator plans and ratings and give you some information so that you can be sure that you'll know which plan you're beginning on. So if you have some questions, we're going to pause a couple times during the presentation to address these questions, and there are many different ways that you can reach out to us. One is that school leaders can text Jared with the number that they have. Any of you can send an email to Angela Rubenstein in our office with this number, with this address right up here on the screen. You can also text or tweet or submit your question to this HTTP address. So we certainly hope you have a lot of questions given the number of venues we gave you to ask them. So we have a number of hopes for this new educator evaluation system. And the first one is that it allows us to really focus on student learning and growth and to, as you'll see, set goals specifically for your practice and for your students' achievement. It also sets a higher bar for professional teaching status. And as you'll see throughout the 5-step cycle, it really allows teachers and enables teachers to have a voice in their process, both through the self-assessment process and through the gathering of evidence. The rubric that we're going to talk about first gives educators a chance to develop a shared vocabulary around what effective teaching is, and to make sure that your definition of effective teaching is the same as your evaluators and that there are no secrets about what you're being evaluated on and what we're looking for in schools. This slide here expresses our hope that we can use the performance evaluation system to really tie together some of the new initiatives that are coming our way now, like the Common Core shifts, as well as some other things that you're already doing in schools already, like using data to differentiate instruction. So as we talk through this presentation, you should be thinking about things that you're already doing in schools, structures that you have, such as data teams, time that you have to work with your colleagues, such as common planning time, while you're thinking about how you're going to do this work that's related to evaluation. So our objectives today are quite simply to give you an overview of the rubric for effective teaching, to talk with you about this 5-step cycle, and then at the end to address the different types of ratings and the different types of growth plans that you'll see in the system. So we have worked throughout the last school year with the 11 turnaround schools in Boston who implemented the new system beginning last September, and we've learned a great deal from them. We've also seen some instances where things went very well and where people put a lot of work into the system and then felt like it was a way, as I said earlier, to tie together the work they're doing already around using data, around developing a common definition of teaching and setting goals. So you'll see on the bottom a chart that shows these 4 district priorities that were on that previous slide: professional growth and evaluation, using data to differentiate instruction, increasing academic rigor, and engaging family, communities, and partners. Throughout this presentation, as we talk about the 4 standards and as we talk about the way that teachers will be evaluated using the 4 standards, you'll see how these 4 academic priority areas are woven throughout. So many of you know that in the news there have been many stories about evaluation systems in large cities such as LA and New York City and Washington, D.C. That have been in the news for unfortunate reasons, for inappropriate ways that data was used. Our system, we feel, is a very thoughtful, complicated but thoughtful system that incorporate student learning and growth data in a very responsible way, and you'll see how we do that as we talk about the cycle. Our system is dictated by state regulation, and because of these state regulations, we need to implement the system this year. At the end of the presentation, you'll also see a link to the Department of Ed's website where you can read these regulations directly. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is this rubric and developing common expectations through the rubric. This rubric does a number of things that, that we feel really good about. The first thing that it does is that it makes sure that our expectations for what teachers and evaluators believe should be in classrooms are common, and that we understand the language that both evaluators are using and teachers are using when talking about their practice. Past performance evaluation systems often have led to situations where there are inconsistent expectations between teachers and evaluators. And as I said earlier, there is also in this system an opportunity for the educator's voice to run throughout the process. What's new, we've already talked about. There's a rubric for effective teaching, 5-step cycle for evaluation, our online system, and then 4 different performance levels and 4 different educator plans. So formerly, for those of you who have been teaching in the district for a while, you have been familiar with the 8 dimensions of effective teaching. The state regulations have come out with 4 standards for teacher evaluation. And these 4 standards effectively package these dimensions in a different way. They do not add or change to those expectations that we had before in Boston, but they've in a way simplified them by moving to 4 standards. And we've done a pretty extensive crosswalk between the former dimensions as well as the new standards. And virtually all of the dimensions are captured well in these new standards. You'll see that there are 2 asterisks next to number 1 and number 2, curriculum planning and assessment and teaching all students. The asterisks are there because in order for an educator to be rated proficient overall, they must be rated proficient on Standard 1 and Standard 2. We'll talk more about that when we talk about the ratings at the end, but that's why there are those 2 asterisks indicating essentially a heavier weight on those 2 standards. Another point that is important to make is that the new administrator standards for principals are very closely aligned to the new teacher evaluation standards. Under the state regulations, every licensed educator, every educator who is licensed by the Department of Education is going to be evaluated under this new 5-step cycle. One difference is that and you can see here, if you look at the principal standards on the right side of the screen, instructional leadership has an asterisk. It essentially incorporates the qualities under standards 1 and 2 for teachers, and instructional leadership for principals and administrators means that if you're a proficient instructional leader, you are enabling your teachers, providing the supports and feedback needed for them to be proficient in the teacher standards 1 and 2, curriculum planning and assessment and teaching all students. You can see that standards 3 and 4 are exactly the same when you look at these 2 lists of standards. So this is one of the big changes. And if we've been in your school, we've introduced you to the rubric, and we hope that you have some time in the upcoming days with the rubric talking about the contents of the rubric and spending some time with it. Key change number 2 is moving to a 5-step cycle that's defined in the state regulations. When we've come out to your schools, we've asked you about your experiences with evaluation, and many of you have described situations where perhaps you were observed once in a year and given potentially some feedback. And that is essentially what is a summative evaluation, just a one-shot deal, a one-time of feedback. The regulations call for a 5-step cycle of continuous learning that begins with an educator's self-assessment. It then moves, and we're going to go through this in a little bit more detail in a moment. It moves from self-assessment to goal setting and developing an action plan for your year. Implementation of the plan is essentially what you've been doing, all of the work that you do in school. It's teaching, it's working with students, working with parents, getting feedback from your evaluator, all the while collecting some evidence about your practice, things that you're producing, lesson plans, documentation of conversations with parents, different types of artifacts that will help you talk about your practice. A formative assessment or formative evaluation is a checkpoint halfway through your evaluation cycle where you'll get some feedback from your evaluator. And that summative evaluation is the wrap-up of that cycle, which will lead directly into self-assessment. Our third key change is that we have developed within Boston Public Schools OIIT a system to keep track of all of this information related to the evaluation system. We call it the Employee Development and Feedback System because it allows for a two-way conversation between evaluator and teacher about every step of the cycle. So depending on how close you're sitting to the screen, you may be able to see that these icons represent each step of the cycle, starting with the self-assessment. So we'll show you throughout this presentation the appropriate screenshot for each step of the cycle. So also in the previous evaluation system in Boston, as in many places in the country, we had two different categories of ratings. We had does meet standards, a large category encompassing what ended up being about 98% of our teachers, and then does not meet standards. New state regulations call for 4 categories, which differentiate between teachers based on their practice in their classroom. The state defines proficient as fully and consistently meets the requirement of a standard. So I'm going to go into some components of the rubric, and then in about 5 minutes I'm going to give you a chance to digest some of this with your staff, and then to make sure that we're getting some questions so that we can address them either during the presentation or at the end. So first I'll go through this key change number 1. So as I introduced you to before, there are 4 new standards for teacher evaluation. The teacher rubric takes these 4 standards and breaks them down into indicators and elements with the aim of being very specific about how these standards can be discussed between teachers and evaluators and teachers and teachers. What you're looking at right now is what we call an at a glance, which is the entire rubric on 1 page. You have the 4 standards going across, and then a list of the indicators and elements under each one. Altogether, there are about 33 elements. So if you look closely at one standard, this slide shows you curriculum planning and assessment, which is standard number 1. This gives an example of one of the indicators under standard 1, and then one of the elements. So you've got standard 1, curriculum planning and assessment, the indicator, curriculum and planning, and the element, subject matter knowledge. We talk about the numbers of these things, so later we're going to be referring to some of the numbers. So you can see that subject matter knowledge is 1A1. So the purpose of a rubric of effective teaching is to give you a way to talk about your teaching as over time. It is not a classroom observation tool. The rubric is about 14 pages long. It is not meant as something that someone who is observing your classroom would sit in and circle certain boxes on there and then give it to you as an assessment of your teaching practice. It is meant to make help you make informed professional judgments that are used both in that formative assessment time and summative rating time for both a rating on each standard and your overall performance. So again, we hope that this rubric is used in conversations with teachers during common planning time, with evaluators, with principals, with members of the school administrative staff during staff meetings and other times, so that you can develop a common terminology and a way to think about what types of evidence you're going to be collecting over the year. I'm going to pause right now and give you all about 2 minutes to think about what questions you have for us so that you can send them our way, and we'll will do our best to answer them. Okay, we're back. Thank you very much. Please continue to send your questions. We've decided we'll just save them for a little bit later after we've gone through a little bit more of the cycle. So step number 1 is self-assessment. And this step, it's no coincidence that this cycle begins with the educator's voice. And this is in response to the many educators who are involved in the state process who said that an evaluation process would be much more useful to them if they could be involved in determining along with their evaluator what the focus was going to be for their work for the year. So the self-assessment is a chance for a teacher to think about their practice, to think about what are their strengths and their areas for development, and to also think about their students who are in front of them and what their needs are, and to think about what their areas are going to be when they focus for the year. The self-assessment process itself is a private process. The educator will enter a summary of their strengths and their areas of need into the EDFS. This summary essentially asks for one area of strength and one area of development, and that gets entered. The teacher will enter that into the online system, click submit, and an email will be sent to their evaluator that the self-assessment is now online. You will not, as a teacher, submit a full rubric used for self-assessment. It's a great tool to use, and we do hope that teachers spend time reading about it, reading about the different elements and reading the language in the rubric, but this aspect is private. Just to give you a sense of the state forms which we're using as a basis for our online system. Again, there are no paper forms in this system. It's all online. But the reason we're showing you this form on the self-assessment is this is what our online system is based on. The first part of a self-assessment is an analysis of the student learning, growth, and achievement of the students that you have in your class. It's August. We know you all are in the process of finding out who your students are. Some of you may know, some of you may have some data for incoming students. Others of you will probably in September be doing a lot of assessment in your classroom to figure out what do my students already know, what do they need to know. This is a chance to think about that process that you're doing already in schools, that you've probably done every September for your entire teaching career, and to think through what your students need. The second part of self-assessment is an assessment of your own practice against the performance standards. That means the rubric. So thinking about the rubric, where are your areas of strength? What are you good at? What do you feel strong about? What do you think that you could share with other teachers? And then what are some areas that you have for development? It is our hope that with your school leaders, you can think a little bit about the rubric, think about what your school student learning needs are, and then narrow down the rubric into some priority areas. So that although you can and you're welcome to self-assess against all 33 elements on the rubric, you may not need to if your school can help you focus and tell you what are the 6 to 8 priorities or so that your school is going to be focusing on for the year. Our hope for the self-assessment process is that it sets you off on a track to set goals, one student learning goal and one professional practice goal that are aligned with what you need to focus on and what your school has chosen as a school-wide focus. This is, again, a process that your school is doing already. You've had to write whole school improvement plans before. There are goals in the whole school improvement plan that can help guide this process. And similarly, the goals that you set for your evaluation can help guide your whole school improvement plan goals. So this process helps keep that student learning at the core of all that we're doing in our classrooms. So self-assessment leads directly to the proposal of goals. At this point, you're thinking about where do I want to grow? Where do I want my students to grow this year? We want you to have a sense of where you want your students to be by May or June of this school year so that you can backwards map your work for the year and think about the things that you want to do in your professional practice. The rationale for goal setting, many of you may set goals in your personal lives, either to run a marathon or to read a certain number of books. This practice, we believe, will help teachers focus their work in the classroom and also allow schools to focus their professional development time in ways that are much more strategic than they have been in the past. You will be setting, every educator in the state of Massachusetts implementing the system will be setting one goal for student learning, growth, and achievement, and one goal for professional practice. We'll talk about how we strongly encourage that teams work together, whether it's a grade level team or a department team or whatever makes sense for the context of your school, and develop shared goals so that they can, again, focus their conversation and their resources and then observe each other and work together to make a difference on those goals. The regulations state that the educator will propose goals and that the supervisor will determine them. We'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about the 4 different educator plans. But in general, we expect this to be a collaborative process where you have some guidance from your school leaders about where your goals, what areas your goals might cover, and that you work with them and with your team to refine those goals and to make them what we call SMART, and I'll talk about in a second. So all this talk about having team goals and that graphic earlier about hoping that evaluation can be a way to integrate all of the different initiatives that you're thinking about at your school. This slide shows graphically that our goal is that the district priorities and school priorities and self-assessment will all lead you to your goal setting. That your goals will be aligned with the way that we're focusing our resources both at a school and a district level. This slide also notes that the self-assessment, which includes the first draft, the proposal of your goals, is due by October 1st. So SMART goals. This is an acronym that the state is using to describe the qualities of a good goal. Specific, measurable, attainable, results-focused, and time-bound. So we like to say that because we're in Boston and we all have very strong accents, we are focused more on the beginning part, the SMA part, the SMA part. We want goals to be very specific, and we need to know how you're going to measure them. If you can't measure them, then you won't know by the end of the time period, which is the T, whether you've met them. We also really focus on, are they attainable? Are they rigorous, and are they high-quality goals, but are they something that you can reasonably be expected to accomplish within the time frame that you have specified? What we have seen from our work with the turnaround schools is that the goal proposal process can take a while, and that if it's done well, it sets the stage for a year that is focused on the priorities of the teacher and the school, and leads to a relatively smooth evaluation process. To give you a sense of what this looks like in the educator development and feedback system, we have a couple of slides to show you some screenshots. Again, what we expect is that you may do some work, some strategy work with your team, some conversations around what makes a good goal, what your priorities should be, before you click on the online system to enter it. So what we're just showing you here is what it looks like when you go online. So again, you propose one goal for student learning and one goal for professional practice. You may have many, many other goals, things that you want to accomplish, things that you're planning to do. You've probably been to some professional development this summer and you've got some great ideas for a number of things you want to do in your classroom. For the purposes of evaluation, your goals should be aligned to your school priorities, and you should think carefully about having how many you actually want to include in the evaluation process. And we suggest that you have one on student learning and one on professional practice. So there are templates in the online system that will support your process of writing these goals. You are welcome to use them or not use them as you choose. So when you go online and you click the goals icon, you will first see the screen. Probably you can't see it from where you're sitting, but it asks you to label the goal as either student learning or professional practice. It also asks you to label whether it's an individual goal or a team goal, and then asks you to tag by what you teach and what population of students you're aiming the goal at. So you can see that we have the template here that makes sure that you specify what your baseline is, how you know that this is going to be a good goal that's relevant to your students, and also specifies where you want them to be by the end of the school year or the length of your plan. Here's a screenshot that just shows the professional practice goal. In this case, you must tag it to an element on the rubric. This template also asks you to think about what you're going to do. This is about your own behavior, your own teacher practice, and how often you're going to do it, how you're going to measure it. So the process of submitting goals is that you, the teacher, will put them into the online system, and when you submit it, it will go to your evaluator in order to be approved or to be sent back to you with some questions from your evaluator about revising it. So you can see on the screen there's a list. It would have your name, obviously, the fact that you're a teacher, and the name of your evaluator across the top, and then it would list the types of goals that you have entered into the system. You'll also see on the far left side under those puzzle pieces, there are some links you can click to get some help with writing goals that has some guidance from our office. And there's also a place that your school leadership team can enter whatever school-wide goals you have, whatever team goals they've helped you determine and any guidance they have for you. So after you've set your goals and you've proposed them by October 1st, we're moving on to implementation of the plan, which, among other things, includes times when you might be observed by your evaluator. So this is a time to think about, I've set these goals, I know what I think I'm good at and in the areas where I think I need to grow. What am I going to do to get myself and my students where I want us to be by the end of this plan? So what you'll see when you're in the online system is that there are some action steps. And these action steps are things that you will detail about how you're going to meet your goals by the end of your cycle. You'll be asked to think about what actions you're going to take, what supports or resources you're going to require in order to meet your goals, and then how often you will be taking these steps and when you expect to be finished. So you'll also be putting these action steps into the EDFF. During this time, both you and your evaluator have an opportunity to collect evidence in the EDFS. You can upload all types of different files, types of pictures. If you have access to a scanner, you can scan materials into the system. If you do not have access to a scanner and you want to keep some paper copies of something, you still need to go into the system under this icon that says evidence and tag each piece of evidence with part of the rubric that you're giving evidence for. There's also a place on the online system for you to explain why you've chosen that particular piece of evidence. It is our recommendation that evidence is what we call robust and allows evaluators to assess across multiple different rubric areas. So for example, if you have an example of a lesson plan that shows evidence of differentiation, which is an area on the rubric, and maybe also shows that you're choosing appropriate complex text for your students to use, which corresponds to a different area on the rubric, and maybe also shows the homework assignment that involves some parents, which is yet another part of the rubric. That is a piece of what we would call robust evidence. We are currently developing an observation tool that will be for mobile devices for evaluators, and evidence that evaluators collect from doing observations in your classroom will be uploaded to the EDFF, and you will get a notice, an email, that something has been uploaded to the system. We are very excited about this because this means that you will have access to your evaluators' comments right away. Evaluators will be uploading their comments within 5 days of the observation, as this notes on the slide. So the next steps of the process are a formative assessment or evaluation, which happens halfway through the cycle. And we, on purpose, have not talked about the length of these cycles because we're going to get into that when we talk about the different plans. But typically, a cycle might be a year, which means that you'll have your formative assessment check-in point halfway through that year. That's a chance for you to get feedback from your evaluator, to talk about your performance in relation to the standards, the 4 standards, and overall, and maybe to talk about specific areas that are going well and specific areas that you're still continuing to work on. The summative evaluation will happen at the very end of your cycle, and the information that you talk about with your evaluator, the ratings that you've gotten on those 4 standards and on your progress on the 2 goals, will feed directly into your self-assessment and will inform what you're going to do the next cycle. So we see this as a culture of continuous learning where what you do in each step informs the next step of the cycle. We want to give you a chance to see what it looks like when your evaluator is actually writing an evaluation. So here again is a screenshot with every step of the cycle. Starting from the left, there's just goals, standards, prescriptions, comments, and overall rating. And this is what you'll see are the components of a summative evaluation. And we're going to talk about this in a bit when we talk about the overall rating. So you'll receive a rating first on the progress you've made toward meeting your goals. This means that you set a SMART goal, you knew what you wanted to accomplish by the end of the time period, and let's say the end of the time period is May, and you have the data that you knew you'd have available to you, and you're able to look at the progress you've made. You'll receive one of 5 ratings on that goal. Whether you've exceeded your goal, whether you've met your goal, made some progress, made little progress, or not made progress at all. Or there's also a chance for your evaluator to say that there's no data available. You'll get a rating on each of those goals, and then you'll get one of the 4 ratings, exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory, on each of the 4 standards, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. All of this information, which I'm going to skip ahead a couple slides just to show you, all of this information feeds into an overall rating. So people ask us quite often, what happens if I don't meet one of my goals? This scares me, this worries me, this puts a lot of pressure on me. You can see that progress on your goals is only one piece of this puzzle that leads eventually to an overall rating. So we encourage people to set goals that are attainable and that are realistic, but also that reach high, because you can see that making progress on a goal, maybe even if you are not meeting it, but if you've shown the evidence that you've worked on it, that you've put the appropriate steps in place, that's all going to be fed into this overall rating, and not in a specific calculation, but with your evaluator's professional judgment. Just to go back. So I was just showing you that the screen where you get your ratings on standards and goals, there's a sign-off at the end. All of this, again, is online. There's no paper parts to this process that gets entered into your official evaluation process. And there's a chance, and you can see by the regulations, the educator shall have the opportunity to respond in writing to the formative or summative assessment according to the regulations. And there's a place for you to comment and a place for you to sign off. So before we go into educator plans and ratings, I'm going to pause one more time, or actually the second to last time, for 2 minutes to give you a chance to send us some questions so that we can get to those momentarily. Okay, welcome back again. Again, please send your questions so that we can answer them at the end. And of course, if questions come up after this, you can always email us or call us, and we're happy to talk this through with you. Oops, hang on. Okay, I've already showed you this slide, but it bears repeating, that your overall rating depends on a number of factors: your progress on 2 different goals and your rating on the 4 standards. So all of these things get folded up into an overall rating, which is one of 4 categories. So this is the last category that we want to talk to you about, the fact that there are 4 rating categories and also 4 different types of educator plans. So educator plans, the regulations state, are determined by both your performance rating and your career stage. So if you are, and this is going forward, in a minute I'm going to talk to you about the transition, which is going into this school year, but this is just going forward. If you are a teacher and you're rated proficient or exemplary, you're going to be on a self-directed growth plan, which is either 1 to 2 years in duration, and the length is decided by your evaluator. If you have been rated needs improvement, you're going to be on a directed growth plan. The regulations note that directed growth plans are up to a year in length, and that educators on a directed growth plan cannot stay for more than 1 cycle on a directed growth plan. They need to move up to a self-directed growth plan or down to an improvement plan. Educators who are rated overall unsatisfactory, according to the regulations, will be placed on an improvement plan, which ranges in length from 30 calendar days to a year. Again, you cannot stay more than once on an improvement plan. You must move up, or that teacher would be removed from their position. The evaluator guides the length of the plan and the duration of the plan based on both their previous evaluations and the prescriptions that have been written. So on the right side of your screen, you have this long box, which is called a Developing Educator Plan. And this is for educators who are new to the profession. So they're in their first 3 years and they do not have professional teaching status. These teachers have 3 one-year plans, 1 year in duration each. This allows the educator to show proficiency in all 4 standards by their 4th year in order to earn professional teaching status. And we said earlier that the system holds a high bar for teachers to earn PTS, and educators must show proficiency in all 4 standards in order to earn it. So for this next year, this is how we are translating last year's system into this year's system. On the left, you'll see the options for the existing ratings from this previous system, and then on the right, you'll see these new plans, and I'll explain how we're going to get to them. One overall, so first of all, if the teacher has an overall meet standard, they will be translated into a self-directed growth plan, which, as I described earlier, is a plan that is either 1 or 2 years long, and your evaluator will decide this. If you've had 1 overall does not meet standards, you'll be on a directed growth plan. If you've had 2 or more overall does not meet standards evaluations, you'll be placed on an improvement plan. Again, the length of plan will be decided by your evaluator and will be determined by the prescriptions and a reasonable amount of time that it would take to achieve the work dictated in the prescription. So we are using the forms directly from the Department of Education. The rubric is also directly from the Department of Education. And you can find all that information on the websites we're going to show you on the last slide. All provisional teachers will be on a developing educator plan. So that means wherever you are, first, second, or third year, you'll be on that developing educator plan. And you have to show proficiency on all 4 standards in order to achieve professional teaching status. So there are a number of things that you can do to prepare for the school year that is starting up right now. We hope that you'll spend some time, maybe directly after this webinar or some other time that you've got with your colleagues before school starts, becoming familiar with the rubric and thinking about how it relates to your practice. We also hope that you'll spend some time thinking about school-wide goals for student learning, and then thinking about the practices that are most likely to make the biggest dent in those goals? What are your high leverage practices, some of which you may already be focused on, some of which may be new? When you have been assigned your students, make sure you're looking at their data and noting where you'll need to focus your efforts this year. And stay engaged with us. We are more, as I said a number of times, we're more than willing to talk through all of the different resources on our website and different strategies that we've learned over this last year of implementation. These are some of the websites that I have mentioned throughout the presentation. We have the Weebly site. Both of these sites, for more information, lead you to the same site. We've just had different addresses throughout the year. And we have resources organized by stage of the evaluation process. We recommend, obviously, that you're focusing now on the school assessment of your goals and your own self-assessment and your goal proposal by October 1st. We know that that will be the focus of September. We have some examples on our website. We'll have some more examples of goals up there so that you can see what people have done previously. This email address, BPS evaluation at Boston, etc., comes directly to us, and we're happy to answer questions there. And because the system is mandated by the state, we have all of the state resources up here at that third link. So I'm going to check in with my colleagues to see which questions we're going to answer now. And as I do that, I want to show you a slide of the people in our office, and all of whom are excited and ready to talk to you when you've got questions. So I'm going to pause it for just about 30 seconds while we organize which questions we're going to answer. We'll be right back. Hi, we're back again. Just to answer a couple of your questions. One question was, is the evaluation system going to merge with the current IPDP, the Individual Professional Development Plan? That question, we're going to keep track of what the state is doing on that front now. But you can always record. So I think our best answer to you is that we will communicate with you after the state has made some movement on that front. Another question is, will all teachers be evaluated in the new system this year? The answer is yes, as well as principals and central office staff and other administrators. How often does a teacher who is rated exemplary or proficient get evaluated? Is it every year? So teachers rated proficient and exemplary will be on self-directed growth plans, and these plans can last for 1 or 2 years. So you will technically get some feedback every year. You'll get either a formative assessment. If it's a 2-year plan, you'll get that formative evaluation at the end of that first year in May or June. But you'll only get the summative evaluation at the end of the plan. So that would either be 1 or 2. Another question was, how do you develop a self-directed growth plan? Is it a document that you and the principal develop? So this goes back to a point I made earlier, probably specifically in relation to the goals you're developing. The state envisions that the conversation between evaluator and teacher will be a little bit different depending on the plan you're on. So for example, if you're on a self-directed growth plan, because you've been previously rated proficient or exemplary, you'll develop your goals and action plan, and I'm sure there will be conversation with your evaluator, and your evaluator will approve those goals and the action plan. If you're on a directed growth plan, you'll co-create those goals and action plans. If you're on an improvement plan, the vision is that the evaluator will develop the goals, goals that are specific to improving the educator's performance, and those goals will be entered onto the online system, most likely for the educator. If you're on a developing educator plan because you're in your first 3 years and you don't have professional teaching status, you'll co-create those goals and action plans. One thing we have maybe not emphasized enough is that because this is an online system, you must be very diligent about checking your Boston Public Schools email address. All communication will come to you through that system. You'll find out when your evaluator has approved goals, for example, or uploaded evidence. And likewise, your evaluator will be able to check when you also have uploaded evidence and things like that. So I believe that's all the questions that have come in. Again, we're more than happy to talk with you. We hope that the next few days are very productive as you get ready for greeting your students next week. And please stay in touch with us.
Hi, it looks like we have one more question that came in. And this question is, can a teacher earn proficient if they get needs improvement or unsatisfactory in one area of the rubric? So again, the state's regulations require that teachers, in order to be rated proficient or exemplary overall, educators must earn a proficient or exemplary in the first 2 standards. However, for the other 2 standards, for example, you could receive a needs improvement in family and community engagement or in professional culture, and you could still earn a proficient overall, as long as the first 2 standards were proficient as well. Thank you. So thanks again for your participation this morning, and we hope you have a great start to the school year and you continue to be engaged and connected with us throughout. Bye-bye.